Welcome back to another video of Rugged West Stories. Tonight's tale will pull you straight into the dust, blood, and silence of the frontier. Imagine this. A lonely rancher, living miles away from town, stumbles across a wounded native man crawling through the desert, half dead with thirst. Out of simple mercy, the rancher gives him water. But by dawn, the horizon shakes with the thunder of hundreds of hooves, an entire tribe riding toward his ranch. Was it a mistake to show kindness, or the beginning of a story that would change his life forever? The land was dry, the kind of dry that cracked your lips open like old leather, and left even the mesquite trees begging for rain. On his lonely ranch, Samuel Harlow had grown used to silence. It had been nearly 7 years since he buried his wife on the hill overlooking the prairie, and in those years, words had become strangers to him. His cattle didn't need conversation, and the wind was too fickle a friend. That evening, as the sun slid down behind the red ridges, Samuel rode out to check the fence line. His horse's hooves pressed softly into the dust, a steady rhythm that filled the emptiness. Then he saw it, something dark, something moving near the edge of his property. At first he thought it was just another coyote dragging itself toward a carcass, but as he drew closer, his breath caught in his throat. It was a man. The figure lay sprawled in the dirt, his body covered in dried blood, his chest rising and falling like bellows about to give out. His clothes were torn, leather straps hanging loose. Arrows protruded from the earth around him, broken shafts marking where a battle must have taken place. But what made Samuel tense, gripping his rifle tighter, was the man's face. He was Apache. Samuel's first thought was to leave him. For years, ranchers had whispered about raids, burned barns, stolen horses, cattle driven off into the night. He had even seen smoke rising from a neighbor's land, black clouds twisting into the sky after an attack. This man could have been part of it. This man could have killed men, Samuel knew. But then the Apache opened his eyes. They weren't the eyes of a warrior ready to strike. They were the eyes of a dying man, filled with dust and fear and something deeper, pleading. His lips parted, but no words came out, only a rasp that sounded like sand against rock. Samuel looked down at the canteen hanging by his saddle. His hand hovered over it, trembling. Mercy was a dangerous thing in the West. Still, Samuel pulled the canteen free. He crouched down and lifted the man's head carefully, pouring the cool water into his mouth. The Apache coughed, sputtered, then drank greedily. Some of the water spilled over his cracked lips, darkening the dirt below. Samuel didn't stop him. He let the man drink until the canteen was half empty. The man's breathing steadied. He whispered something in his language, words Samuel couldn't understand. Then his eyes rolled back and he collapsed again, unconscious but alive. Samuel cursed under his breath. He knew what this meant. He couldn't just leave him there now, not with coyotes circling. Against every instinct screaming in his bones, Samuel heaved the man up and laid him across his horse. Together they rode back toward the ranch, the weight of a decision pressing heavier on Samuel than the body slumped behind him. By the time he reached the cabin, the stars were out. Samuel laid the man down on his cot, tore strips of cloth to bind his wounds, and stoked the fire. Through the night, he worked silently, cleaning blood, changing bandages, and wondering what madness had driven him to invite danger into his home. Each time the Apache stirred, Samuel's hand hovered near the rifle leaning against the wall, but the man never reached for a weapon. He only whispered in fevered dreams words Samuel still couldn't understand. When dawn broke, Samuel stepped outside to breathe the cold morning air. His ranch stretched out quiet and wide before him, as it always did. For a moment he thought maybe he had done the right thing. Maybe the man would recover, leave, and no one would ever know. Then he heard it, a low rumble at first, like thunder crawling across the earth. It grew louder, steadier, until Samuel realized it wasn't thunder at all. He turned his eyes to the horizon and his stomach dropped. The ridgeline was alive with riders. Dozens, no, hundreds of them. Warriors on horseback, their spears glinting in the morning light, their faces painted in war colors. The dust rose behind them in great clouds as they rode straight toward his ranch. Samuel's hand went numb on the rifle. The water he had given last night, was it an act of salvation? Or had he signed his own death sentence? The ground shook as the first of the riders came closer. An entire tribe was coming for him, and he had no idea what they wanted. Samuel Harlow stood on his porch, rifle heavy in his hands, watching the ground tremble beneath a storm of approaching riders. The sun had just climbed over the horizon, casting long golden rays across the prairie, and in that light, the figures looked more like ghosts than men, warriors draped in leather and feathers, their painted faces hard as stone. The sound was deafening, hooves pounding like drums of war, dust rising high until it seemed a wall of earth itself was bearing down on him. Samuel's heart hammered in his chest, and for a moment he thought of running. But where could he run? His land stretched barren in every direction. No cover, no town, no soldiers for 20 miles. The riders slowed as they neared the ranch, spreading out like a black tide around his barn, his cattle pens, and finally the porch where Samuel stood. He counted as best he could, 30, 40, 50, until the number blurred into too many. But all eyes seemed to focus on him. At the front rode a man taller than the rest, his hair bound with eagle feathers, a necklace of claws hanging across his chest. His face bore the kind of scars that weren't just from battle, but from years of leading men through it. This was no ordinary warrior. This was a chief. Samuel tightened his grip on the rifle. He could feel sweat dripping down his back despite the morning chill. Then from inside the cabin he heard movement, the wounded Apache stirring. The chief raised a hand and the entire sea of riders came to a sudden, eerie halt. Silence fell, broken only by the soft whicker of horses and the creak of leather saddles. The chief's gaze was steady as he looked at Samuel, then past him toward the door of the cabin. "White man," the chief finally spoke, his English rough but clear. "You hold our brother." Samuel's throat was dry. His instinct was to lie, to deny it, but what good would that do? They had already seen the tracks leading to his cabin, already smelled blood. Slowly he nodded. "He was dying. I gave him water." A murmur rippled through the riders. Some faces softened, others hardened. The chief dismounted with slow, deliberate steps, each footfall quiet yet heavy with power. He walked to the porch, stopping only a few feet away. "You saved him," the chief said. "Wasn't a question." "I did what any man ought to do," Samuel replied, though even as he said it, he wasn't sure if he believed those words. Out here, mercy wasn't common, it was dangerous. The chief's eyes narrowed, studying him. Then with a sharp motion, he gestured toward the cabin. Two warriors dismounted and entered. Samuel felt his gut twist. If they thought he had harmed the man, this would end in blood. Moments later, the warriors emerged, supporting the wounded Apache between them. His bandages were still fresh, Samuel's handiwork visible. The man opened his eyes weakly and spoke something in his own tongue. The warriors listened, then nodded toward the chief. The chief turned back to Samuel. "He says you gave him water when the desert would have taken him. He says you bound his wounds when death was near." Samuel said nothing, only nodded once. The chief's stern expression shifted, just barely. It wasn't warmth, not yet, but it wasn't hostility either. He spoke again, louder now, his voice carrying over his people. "This rancher spared the life of one of ours. He gave him water. He did not turn away." The warriors murmured among themselves. Some dismounted, resting hands on their horses. Others still eyed Samuel with suspicion, their gazes sharp and untrusting. Then the chief faced Samuel again. "You will host us." Samuel blinked. "Host you?" The chief nodded once. "We ride many days. We bleed, we hunger. You will give us shelter, food, water. For this your land will be safe." The words rang in Samuel's ears like a threat, and a promise wrapped in one. His land safe? Or his land forfeit? He didn't know. All he knew was that nearly 100 Apache warriors now camped outside his barn, and he was one man with one rifle. Slowly, he lowered his weapon. "I don't have much, but I'll do what I can." The chief's eyes lingered on him a moment longer. Then he turned and raised his hand. The riders dismounted in waves, setting up small fires, tending to horses, laying out blankets. It was as if Samuel's quiet ranch had been swallowed whole by another world, a world of smoke, leather, and foreign voices. Samuel stepped back inside his cabin, leaning against the door. The wounded Apache still lay on his cot, breathing shallowly but alive. Samuel glanced at him, then back outside where the fires were already crackling. What had he done? By giving water, he had saved one man. By saving one man, he had invited an entire nation onto his land. And as night fell again, Samuel realized something chilling. There was no telling if these warriors truly came as guests or as conquerors. The night had fallen heavy on Samuel's ranch, a night unlike any he had ever known. Instead of silence, the air pulsed with life. Fires burned across the yard, their smoke curling into the sky. The sound of drums echoed softly, mixed with the chants of men and the laughter of children. Horses stamped the ground restlessly, their silhouettes moving like shadows in the firelight. Samuel stood by the window of his cabin, rifle still leaning against the wall but untouched. He watched it all with an uneasy tightness in his chest. His land had never felt less his own. Inside, the wounded Apache stirred. The man was stronger now, sitting upright on Samuel's cot. His dark eyes followed Samuel closely, but not with anger, with something quieter, something Samuel couldn't place. Gratitude, perhaps, or maybe warning. Samuel poured a small tin of coffee, the bitter smell filling the cabin. He hadn't expected company when he boiled the pot earlier. Now he wasn't sure if he should offer it or guard it. Supplies weren't endless. And yet, an entire tribe outside meant his choice didn't matter much anymore. The cabin door creaked. Samuel turned fast, his hand brushing the rifle. But it was the chief who stepped inside, ducking slightly through the doorway. The firelight from outside cast long shadows across his scarred face. "You live alone," the chief said, not as a question but as an observation. Samuel nodded slowly. "For years." The chief's gaze flicked around the room, taking in the shelves of tools, the table, the cot where his wounded tribesman lay. Then his eyes rested back on Samuel. A man who lives alone still chooses to be alone. Why? The question cut deeper than Samuel expected. He swallowed, staring into the black swirl of his coffee. The land takes enough without men taking more. That's all. The chief studied him in silence, then said, "You gave water when you could have turned away. That choice will be remembered." Before Samuel could answer, the chief stepped back outside. But his words lingered, heavier than the coffee cup in Samuel's hands. By dawn, Samuel discovered what it meant to host a tribe. Women gathered at the stream, filling water skins. Hunters brought down rabbits and quail, roasting them on spits. Children ran through his pasture as though it were theirs, laughing and chasing one another. And the warriors, silent, sharp-eyed, patrolled the edge of his property like guards. For a fleeting moment, Samuel almost felt safer. Raiders would not dare strike a ranch with an army camped on it. But then again, what difference was there between protection and occupation? As the sun rose higher, Samuel worked the barn, throwing hay for the cattle. A shadow fell across the door, and he turned to find a young Apache girl watching him. She couldn't have been older than 10, her eyes curious, her dress simple. She pointed at the cow and said something in her tongue. Samuel hesitated, then mimicked the word back to her. She laughed, the sound bright against the dusty morning. Soon others gathered, children, even a few women. They asked about the animals, touched the saddles, marveled at the tools Samuel had built with his own hands. For the first time, the rancher spoke words he hadn't spoken in years. Simple things, yes. Names of tools, of animals, gestures and clumsy words bridging the gulf between them. But not everyone welcomed the peace. That afternoon, as Samuel fetched water from the stream, 2 warriors approached him. Their faces were hard, their movements deliberate. One spoke in broken English. "You live on this land, you claim it." Samuel narrowed his eyes. "I don't claim what I didn't earn. I built this place." The warrior's gaze sharpened. This land was ours before fences, before cabins. The tension was thick as smoke. Samuel's hand twitched toward the handle of the bucket, though he knew it wasn't much of a weapon. But then, the wounded Apache appeared behind them. He still moved stiffly, but his voice was firm. He spoke rapidly in their language, his words sharp and commanding. The 2 warriors froze, glared at Samuel one last time, and then walked away. Samuel exhaled slowly, his heart hammering. He turned to the wounded man. "What did you say to them?" The Apache met his eyes. "That you are not enemy. Not yet. Not yet," Samuel repeated under his breath. The wounded man tilted his head. "The chief decides, but many do not trust you. Some want blood for blood." Samuel nodded grimly. And you? The Apache's expression was unreadable. Then he said softly, You gave water. That is enough. For me. That night, Samuel sat on his porch as the fires burned low and the drums quieted. The chief approached again, his steps slow, his eyes reflecting the flames. He sat beside Samuel without a word at first, gazing out at the wide, starlit prairie. Finally, the chief spoke. Tomorrow, a council. The tribe will decide what to do with you. Samuel's chest tightened. What to do with me? The chief nodded. Some say you are ally. Some say you are trespasser. Some say you must pay for the rivers of blood between our people. Samuel swallowed hard. His rifle leaned against the wall beside him, useless against so many. And you? What do you say? The chief's gaze lingered on him, unreadable as the night sky. I say the desert does not give water lightly. When it does, men should not waste it. With that, the chief rose and walked back into the dark, leaving Samuel staring at the stars, the weight of a tribe pressing heavier than the desert itself. Tomorrow would bring a council. Tomorrow, his fate would be decided. And Samuel knew one thing for certain. Mercy had a price, and he was about to pay it. Morning came like a slow knife, carving through the last shreds of Samuel's uneasy sleep. He had spent the night turning in his cot, listening to the drums fade, the murmurs of warriors outside, the restless shuffle of horses. And now, as the sun rose over the desert ridges, the camp stirred again, children laughing, women fetching water, warriors sharpening blades. But today felt different. Today was the council. Samuel stepped out onto his porch. The air was sharp with the smell of smoke and dust. Dozens of eyes turned toward him, their gazes weighing heavy. Some were neutral, some curious, others hostile. He had lived 7 years without company, but never had he felt so exposed. The chief approached, his eagle feather headdress catching the first light of dawn. Behind him walked several elders, their faces lined with age and war. They carried staffs adorned with bones and feathers, symbols of their authority. You come, the chief said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Samuel nodded stiffly. He grabbed his hat, left the rifle where it leaned against the wall, and followed. They led him to a wide circle beyond the barn, where the ground had been cleared and a great fire burned at its center. Around it sat the tribe, men, women, children. Every face turned toward the gathering. The air was thick with smoke and tension. The elders sat nearest the flames. The chief raised his hand, and the crowd hushed. Then he spoke in his tongue, his voice deep, commanding. Samuel couldn't understand, but the cadence alone made his chest tighten. The chief's words rose and fell like thunder, carried by the murmurs of the tribe. Finally, the chief turned to Samuel. His English was rough, but his meaning sharp. You gave water to one of ours. You bound his wounds. But your kind has also burned villages, stolen land, spilled blood. Today we decide, are you friend or enemy? The words rang in the air. One by one, warriors rose to speak. Samuel didn't know the words, but he understood enough by tone and gesture. Some pointed at him accusingly, their voices hard with anger. Others spoke softer, their eyes flicking toward the wounded man he had saved. The debate stretched on like a storm. Samuel stood there in the heat of the fire, sweat beading on his brow, wishing he had the tongue to defend himself. Finally, the chief gestured, and the wounded Apache was brought forward. He leaned heavily on 2 others, but stood tall as his voice carried across the council. He spoke with fire in his eyes, pointing toward Samuel, his tone fierce yet grateful. His words cracked like whips, sharp and unyielding. The crowd murmured, shifting uneasily. Then the wounded man spoke in halting English, his voice weak but clear. He gave me water, when desert wanted me dead. He could walk away, he did not. I live because of him. Silence followed his words. The chief studied Samuel long and hard, then lifted a hand. The council quieted. His gaze was steady, his voice deep as he spoke the verdict. You are not enemy, the chief declared. Not today. You are brother who gave water when none was asked. For this, we honor you. The crowd erupted, some voices cheering, others grumbling. But the decision was made. The chief reached into his necklace, pulling free a small charm carved from bone. He stepped forward and pressed it into Samuel's hand. "This mark," the chief said, "tells all tribes you are friend of the Apache. So long as you carry it, your land is safe." Samuel looked down at the charm, its surface smooth and warm in his palm. He didn't know what to say. For years he had lived with nothing but ghosts and cattle. Now, he stood in the heart of a tribe that could have destroyed him, and instead they had called him brother. That night, the tribe held a feast. Hunters brought venison, women roasted corn, and drums thundered into the sky. Children danced in circles, warriors told stories of battles past, and Samuel sat among them, still half in disbelief. For the first time in years, he felt something stir inside him. Belonging, but even peace carried shadows. As the night deepened, one of the hostile warriors, the same who had confronted Samuel at the stream, approached him. His eyes burned with quiet fury. He leaned close, his words like venom. "You are friend today. But tomorrow? Tomorrow the desert takes back what is hers. Remember this, rancher, mercy cuts both ways." Samuel stared at him, the bone charm heavy in his hand. The fire cracked, the drums beat, the laughter rose. But inside, Samuel knew the truth. The West was never finished. Every choice carved a path deeper into the dust, and one act of mercy could ripple for years. He had given water, he had saved a life, and in doing so, he had bound his fate to a tribe, to a land, to a story larger than himself. As the flames roared and the stars burned bright above the prairie, Samuel finally understood. The desert had not punished him for kindness. It had marked him, and from this night on, his life would never be his own again.